Imagine a land where the echoes of ancient battles still resonate through time, where kingdoms clashed and empires crumbled, only to rise again from the ashes. This is Europe. Tau map zoom in Europe, a continent forged in the crucible of war, revolution, and unrelenting change. From the blood-soaked fields of medieval battles to the storming of castles and the birth of nations, Europe's history is a relentless saga of ambition, power, and survival. Prepare yourself, because this journey through Europe's tumultuous past is not just a ride, it's a plunge into the very heart of history's most dramatic moments. Our journey begins thousands of years ago, when Europe was just a humble, forgettable landmass. It was a place where people spent their days inventing agriculture, and for reasons still unclear, creating massive stone structures. Take Stonehenge, for example, a project that likely started because someone wanted to rock the neighborhood. Meanwhile, on the island of Crete, the Minoans were busy trading with the Egyptians and Phoenicians, creating the roots of European languages. They also had a fondness for labyrinths, possibly to keep their kids entertained on rainy days. The Minoans were eventually replaced by the Mycenaeans, who simplified their writing system, because, honestly, who has time for complicated scripts when there are battles to fight? Fast forward to the 13th century BC, where we find the Greeks uniting for the first time not to build a better future, but to wage war over a woman. Yes, the Trojan War, where Paris of Troy, known for his smooth talking and bad decisions, abducted Helen, sparking a decade-long conflict. The Greeks eventually won, thanks to a wooden horse that wasn't so much a gift as it was a Trojan ruse, proof that you should always check the return policy before accepting presents. After the Trojan War, the Mycenaeans fell apart, and Europe's first dark age set in. But don't worry, things were about to get a lot more interesting with the arrival of the Phoenicians, who spread their alphabet like it was the latest TikTok trend, and the Celts, who were busy mastering iron and burying their dead with impressive flair. By the time we hit 800 BC, Greece was divided into city-states like Sparta and Athens. Sparta was essentially a boot camp with better scenery, while Athens was the birthplace of democracy, though only about 10% of Athenians were actually allowed to vote. Democracy back then was less about power to the people and more about power to the well-armed and well-connected. Meanwhile, across the Aegean, the Persian Empire was having a bit of a territorial disagreement with the Greeks. This culminated in the famous Battle of Marathon, where the Greeks, outnumbered but not outdone, sent the Persians packing. It's said that a messenger ran 26 miles to deliver the news, which is why we now have marathons to remind us how annoying running can be. But while the Greeks were busy philosophizing and fighting among themselves, Rome was on the rise. Rome wasn't built in a day, more like 3 centuries, but when it was done, it was quite something. From humble beginnings as a republic where only the rich could afford proper swords, Rome grew into a sprawling empire, thanks to its highly disciplined legions and a series of wars that were, let's be honest, a bit over the top. Rome's greatest hits include the Punic Wars against Carthage, where they proved that the best way to solve a problem is to completely annihilate the opposition. Then came Julius Caesar, who decided that being a general wasn't enough, he wanted the whole empire. But as history has shown, if you play with knives in the Senate, you're bound to get cut. Following Caesar's dramatic exit, Augustus took the stage, ushering in the Pax Romana, a 200-year period of relative peace, which was a nice break from all the conquering. But all good things must come to an end, and by the 5th century AD, Rome had lost its spark. The empire was split in two, and the Visigoths, led by Alaric, decided it was time to give Rome a makeover by sacking it. After Rome's fall, Europe entered the Middle Ages, a time of knights, feudal lords, and a lot of misunderstanding about personal hygiene. The Franks, led by Charlemagne, tried to pick up the pieces, creating what became known as the Holy Roman Empire, a title that was both ambitious and, as Voltaire later quipped, neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire. But no discussion of the Middle Ages is complete without mentioning the Vikings, who terrorized Europe with their superior ships, raiding coastal towns and proving that you can, in fact, get rich quick with the right amount of violence. As if Viking invasions weren't enough, Europe also had to deal with the Crusades, a series of holy wars where knights, fueled by religious zeal and a desire for plunder, marched off to the Holy Land. The First Crusade was a success, but by the Fourth Crusade they were so lost they ended up sacking Constantinople instead of Jerusalem. Then came the Black Death, a plague that wiped out a third of Europe's population. This catastrophic event did more than just clear the streets, it shook the very foundations of society. Yet, out of the darkness came light, as the labor shortage gave rise to a new social order, and the survivors found themselves with more opportunities, proof that every cloud does indeed have a silver lining, even if it's filled with fleas. With the Middle Ages behind us, Europe entered the Renaissance, a period of rebirth where art, science, and literature flourished like never before. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, proving that a smile really is worth 1,000 words, while Michelangelo's David became the poster boy for what you can achieve if you skip leg day. Meanwhile, Copernicus decided to shake things up by suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, an idea that went over, as well as a flat Earth convention in modern-day science class. But the Renaissance wasn't just about pretty pictures and smart ideas. It also laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther, who famously nailed his 95 Theses to a church door, thus sparking a religious revolution. Luther wasn't a fan of the Catholic Church's pay-to-win system, and neither were many others. This led to wars, schisms, and more than a few heads rolling. Around the same time, England's Henry VIII was making history of his own, though his contributions were less theological and more marital. After being denied a divorce by the Pope, Henry declared himself head of the Church of England, thus allowing him to marry and divorce as many times as he pleased. His 6 wives had varying fates, proving that being married to a king is not as glamorous as it sounds. As Europe's rulers squabbled over religion and territory, explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama set sail for new lands, turning Europe's gaze outward. The discovery of the Americas in 1492 opened up a whole new world of opportunities, and by opportunities I mean resources to exploit and people to conquer. Back in Europe, the Enlightenment was in full swing, with thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire championing reason, science, and individual rights. This intellectual movement laid the groundwork for modern democracy, though at the time it was more about having heated debates in coffeehouses and salons. Meanwhile, in 1789, the French Revolution kicked off when the people of France decided they'd had enough of aristocrats hogging all the cake. The storming of the Bastille was just the beginning, and before long, heads were rolling as the revolutionaries sought to establish a republic based on liberty, equality, and fraternity, or some might say a slightly overzealous response to a bread shortage. Out of the chaos emerged Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who made up for his lack of height with sheer ambition. Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France and set about conquering most of Europe. His reign was marked by military genius, a comprehensive legal code, and a penchant for really big hats. But as all good things must end, so too did Napoleon's rule, after a disastrous campaign in Russia and a final defeat at Waterloo. Napoleon was exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he spent his final days probably wishing he'd stayed in Corsica. The 19th century was a time of great change in Europe, with revolutions sweeping across the continent like a particularly enthusiastic tour group. Nationalism was on the rise, and leaders like Otto von Bismarck in Germany practiced Realpolitik, a fancy term for getting what you want by any means necessary. Bismarck was instrumental in unifying Germany, which involved a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, a few wars, and of course a dash of cunning. Meanwhile, Britain was busy building an empire so vast that the sun literally never set on it, thanks to its global reach and love for afternoon tea. But Europe wasn't just expanding its empires, it was also undergoing an industrial revolution that transformed society. Factories sprouted up like mushrooms after rain, and cities grew at a staggering rate. Unfortunately, working conditions were about as pleasant as a coal mine in July, leading to the rise of labor unions and a few revolts that made employers reconsider the benefits of humane working hours. And then came the 20th century, which saw Europe plunge into 2 world wars that would reshape the continent and the world forever. The spark for World War I was lit in Sarajevo, when a Serbian nationalist decided to take out Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. This set off a chain reaction of alliances, declarations of war, and a 4-year conflict that was as brutal as it was pointless. The Treaty of Versailles ended the war, but its harsh terms sowed the seeds for the next one. Germany, burdened with impossible reparations, turned to a man named Adolf Hitler, who promised to restore the nation's glory. Hitler's rise to power led to World War II, a conflict that would see the horrors of the Holocaust, the devastation of entire cities, and the eventual fall of the Nazi regime. But the darkest hour, as they say, is just before the dawn. The Allied forces, united in their cause, eventually triumphed, and Europe began the long process of rebuilding. The Marshall Plan, funded by the United States, helped to restore Europe's shattered economies, while the creation of the United Nations aimed to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. No sooner had the dust settled from World War II than Europe found itself in the midst of a new conflict, the Cold War. This time it wasn't about trenches and tanks, but ideologies. Capitalism faced off against communism, with Europe caught in the middle. The continent was split by the Iron Curtain, with the Berlin Wall standing as the most infamous symbol of this division. For nearly half a century, Europe was locked in a tense standoff, with both sides amassing nuclear weapons like they were going out of style. But in 1989, the winds of change finally blew through Eastern Europe as the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed. Europe was once again united, though the scars of the Cold War would take time to heal. In the wake of the Cold War, Europe moved towards greater integration, culminating in the creation of the European Union. The EU brought together former adversaries under a single banner, promoting peace, prosperity, and the use of a common currency, the euro. It was a bold experiment in cooperation, proving that, when it comes to avoiding war, a shared love of bureaucracy can work wonders. And so here we are today, Europe, a continent that has seen it all: empires rising and falling, revolutions sweeping through cities, and wars that reshaped the world. Today, Europe is more united than ever, though its future is still unwritten. Will Europe continue on its path of social progress, or will old rivalries resurface? Will it create new masterpieces like Michelangelo's David, or will it find itself embroiled in new conflicts? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: Europe's history is far from over, and whatever comes next, it's bound to be one heck of a story. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your journey through history. Just don't forget to check for Trojan horses on the way out.